Bonjour, bonjour, mes amis. It is delightful to see you here again this evening. I hope you all are well and excited to dive into some of the new insights that the DNA 360 has for you. My name is Dr. Krista Kosterman, and I'm joined this evening by Justin Harris, and we are going to be exploring two new genes in particular that have been added to the DNA 360, and they're specifically intended to deepen our understanding of cardiovascular health. Now, rather than just introduce these two alone, we're going to spend some time as well talking about how they integrate with other genes that already exist within the cardiovascular profile. And we're focusing on this because while cardiovascular health may not come across as the sexiest thing, it's one of the most important things that you could be doing for longevity. The World Health Organization, when you ask them what's causing death amongst this world, unfortunately, about 1 in 3 causes of death right now are associated to cardiovascular illness. And so hopefully by knowing your genes and more importantly, acting on your genes, you can shift some of these numbers for yourself. I'm seeing within the chat already people asking, where do I find these new genes? Right now, everyone who has taken our testing from 2023 and onward has access to these genes. If you've taken it from 2023 and onwards, you have access, but right now that access is limited to our app. This will be changing in the new year, but right now for the month of December, these new genes are just available in the app. So we do have a link in the chat if you want to connect either through Apple Store or Android Store, whatever those things are called. You can download the app and see this information. The two that we are going to be talking about this evening are MLXIPL as well as DHCR7. The first, we're so close today, audience. It's going to be a great night. The first MLX, you're going to find that specifically within your cardiovascular system. That will both be in the system summary as well as the report on cholesterol. For DHCR7, this is going to be in the inflammation report, specifically within the vitamin D section. We're also going to be talking a little bit about another new gene called CYP1A2 because it has quite significant impact on cardiovascular wellness, and that will be found in the summary section of your inflammation report. Justin, do you want to come to the stage so that Apita and I aren't here alone?
Absolutely. It's good to be here for another one of these. This is a very important topic, like Dr. K said. I mean, they say that the heart really is the only organ in the body that never truly rests, right, for your whole lifetime. And the cardiovascular system, I mean, listen, it's a complex closed loop system. It's directly tied into your nervous system and it controls your bloodstream, of course, right? So that's what delivers oxygen and nutrients and hormones all over your body. And just like everything in the body, there's a lot of contributing factors to what cardiovascular health is and what it looks like, right? So, I mean, inflammation matters a lot there. Detoxification matters. Blood sugar management matters. Of course, nervous system regulation, methylation. There's a lot of moving parts. So, understanding that your genes can give you a heck of a lot of info about how your body is going to really do this. And I do think that it's one of the most important factors for longevity, as well as for just quality of life, so we want to make sure that we dive in nice and deep. There's a lot of genes to go through, and the two new additions are really going to help round out our picture. So I'm excited to dive in, Dr. K.
Yeah, likewise, because I think there's so many cardiovascular health I can appreciate can be very overwhelming, right? Because I think when you go to the doctor and your doctor's doing your annual checkup or whatever that looks like for you, they're going to be talking about a lot of terms like cholesterol and blood pressure and a few other things that aren't always grounded in, how do we connect this to our day to day? How do we connect this with what we can tangibly change? Because oftentimes someone with high cholesterol, someone with high blood pressure, these sorts of things, they don't really know it until a doctor points out. It's one of those tricky health endpoints that, save and except for those really extreme conditions of really high blood pressure or heaven forbid, an actual cardiovascular event like a heart attack, it's hard to know when your cardiovascular health isn't all that great. So genes can play such an important role, at least in my mind, as to you're at a greater risk. So you should be monitoring and doing more in order to prevent these outcomes. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's important as well for us to get a good idea of what you guys are here for tonight. So
Hmm.
if lovely Vanny in the background wouldn't mind pulling up the poll, I will run us through it. Thank you, Vanny. All right. So we asked you guys a handful of questions to kind of get an idea of where you're at and what we're looking for tonight. So logically, the very first question that we asked was, what is the main reason why you're joining this webinar? And most of you are here to understand the new genes in the DNA. And about 20% said to learn more about your heart health. I mean, all of these things are going to come into play and matter. 15% just said to see how genetics influence cholesterol, metabolism, etc. And then 7% are just curious. They're just here to learn some new stuff. And I'm sure that you will by the end of tonight. So welcome to everybody. The second question is, have you ever felt confused or frustrated by your cholesterol or your heart health results? And a little bit of an even split, but about 40% of you said, yeah, often, that's something that you're experiencing. So to Dr. K's point, this is a pretty complex thing. There's a lot of moving parts to it, and your genes can give you a heck of a lot of data there. So we're going to really dive nice and deep for you guys. 37% said sometimes, right? And that's pretty regular as well. 16% said rarely, and just 8% said never. So congratulations. I definitely hope it stays that way for you. The third question, which part of cardiovascular health do you struggle with the most? So there's a pretty even split here as well, between cholesterol, energy, sleep, or stress. All of those are major factors. Metabolism or weight management, and about 13% said blood pressure as well. We're going to be talking about blood pressure later on tonight. And 14% said not sure. So welcome to the webinar. I'm sure you'll learn something regardless. Number 4, how strongly do you feel that your diet affects your heart health? And I love this. 70% of you said a lot. I'm completely in agreement. That's one of the main epigenetic things that we have control over every day. And yes, there is major implication to your cardiovascular system. 25% said somewhat, and only 3 and then 2% said not really, or that you're not sure. So diet's part of what we're going to be going over tonight for sure. The last question that we asked is just, which factor do you think affects your heart health the most? We said, is it stress, poor sleep, diet, vitamin D or hormones, weight, metabolism, or you're not sure? And most of you said stress and poor sleep, about 43%. 19% said your diet, right? Sugars, fats, alcohols, etc. Only 6% said low vitamin D or hormones. And we are going to be diving into that tonight because vitamin D is very useful to know about, especially now that it's December. The winter is upon us. 9% said weight or metabolism, right? Metabolic health. And then 23% said not quite sure. The true answer is that each and everything does matter and have implications for the cardiovascular system. So that's why we're going to take a nice, well-rounded approach.
Yeah, no, I love it. All right. So Justin, before we, or at least before you, before you dive into some of the genes that we already have, so we can lay a bit of a context to what we're discussing tonight, the new additions, there have been a few people in the chat asking, is there going to be a replay because they have to bounce? And yes, there will be. So we will, if you want to check out our YouTube page, all of this is available there. And I believe it's also indexed on our website. So Vanny, if you want to maybe put in the chat a few pointers as to where people can access this after the fact. All right, Justin, it's all you, sir.
Yeah, so before we dive into the new genes, we need to lay a little bit of a foundation about the historical genes that we've always looked at and already do look at, because like I said, there's a lot of moving parts to the cardiovascular section. It's not just ApoE. It's not just nitric oxide. There's many, many different things that influence this. So we kind of map it out already in the cardiovascular system, and I'll go over it in brief just so that when we talk about these new additions, it'll make sense as to why they integrate into what we were already doing historically. So when I'm having these conversations with patients and I'm going into their profile, the first gene that I look at is called 9p21. Now, this isn't actually like a SNP or a copy number variation. This is actually what's called a locus, a chromosomal locus. So it's like a location on the chromosome that we're looking at. And this one has significant impact into the hardware of your cardiovascular system, what you're born with, how tough and durable is it? So the way that we measure this in brief is from 0G all the way up to 6G. 3G in the middle, that would be the kind of most common genotype that we look at there. And understand this, that the more Gs you have, the thinner and therefore more problematic or at risk potentially your endothelium is. When I say endothelium, I just mean your blood vessels, right? That lining there. That is what is susceptible to inflammation related damage, right? So we want it a little bit thinner. The closer you can get to that 0G category, the little bit better reinforcement that you have. It's that little bit tougher. I call it rhino lining, right? Because remember that like vehicles used to have something called rhino lining where it was like the back of them. Never mind. But basically, it just means it's
Cool.
very tough. Right? It's like rhino skin. Um, so if you have 0, 1, 2G, you're got a really good hardware there to work with. If you're up above 3G, 4, 5, 6, that just means at a baseline, it's quite a bit thinner. And that means that you're going to want to manage the rest of your lifestyle to the absolute best of your ability. Because when we have toxins and inflammation and things that cause micro tears to happen along that endothelium, the more thinner it is, the more pronounced that damage is, right? So we look at that, and that's the first thing that I look at in this cascade. Then there's other things that are really relevant here as well. So like ApoE, that has got a lot of publicity. They kind of call it the Alzheimer's gene, and I don't love when we call something the blank gene, right? Because we know there's a lot of moving parts. But effectively, ApoE is very important because LDL, right, low density lipoprotein, it basically delivers cholesterol to the site of inflammation, and then HDL is going to pull it back to the liver. And this is supposed to be a nice little efficient cycle. Cholesterol is very sticky. It's like a Vaseline, and it's a soothing agent that helps to deal with the inflammation and the damage that it causes. So when we have a 4 allele in the ApoE, it represents a less efficient cycle here, where your LDL is dispersed and it tends to harden, or it causes effectively plaque before it can be pulled back to the liver nice and efficiently by the HDL. So the 4 allele makes that more likely, and we want to make sure that we're addressing that. I myself have a 3-4. So dealing with cardiovascular inflammation is definitely among my top priorities there.
Yeah.
One of the things that helps deal with that, sorry, Dr. K, I know you're itching to jump in here, is nitric oxide, right? NOS. There's different types of nitric oxide. The one that we look at is more specified to the endothelium, right? So we call it eNOS. It's endothelial nitric oxide, and that's what helps kind of relax those blood vessels. And so once they're relaxed, it allows for more blood flow, right? And that reduces blood pressure. Because remember, like I said, this is a closed loop system. And when we have high blood pressure, it's because there's a kink in the hose. There's less shear flow because of plaque buildup and because of low nitric oxide, et cetera. So nitric oxide, NOS3, that's another really important gene. You wanted to cut in for a moment, Dr. K?
I did. Yeah, I just wanted to tie a few things together for the audience here. So when Justin was talking about 9p21, right, that potential at your hardware level to become inflamed, I want to draw a quick connection point. The more inflammation and kind of cries for help that hardware is putting out, the more likely you are to be packing on some of that cholesterol that Justin was talking about with ApoE. So one of the more tricky combinations, and I'd really encourage you, audience, if you have one of this, to be mindful of it, to be working with a healthcare provider, is going to be if you have a higher G status, so really looking in that 4 to 6G range, and then you have a 4 in your ApoE presentation. Because what if we connect some dots there, your hardware is more likely to send out inflammatory cries for help. And there's many ways, but one of the ways that the body is going to respond to that is, as Justin was saying, packing on that soothing salve that can be cholesterol, right? That's one of the first ambulance responses to, oh no, there's some injury. Let's toss on something that feels good. And so that's more likely then to be creating, especially a low density, a poor packing, right? Think about anytime you put up a building, if you don't use quality material and you do it too quickly, you're running the risk of not doing a good repair and the repair is falling apart. So audience, if you're seeing that you have a few poor presentations between multiple genes, right, that really is a cue to be working with a healthcare provider and doing regular testing, because we want to stay on top of that while it's a small problem before it, blows up into a larger problem. Yeah, there we go. That's what I want. That's what I was itching for.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great context. And it really sort of loops in the importance of the totality of the DNA 360 we look at, because when we're talking about inflammation, of course, we're also talking about poor detox capacity, right? So when you have disruptions in your detoxification with a lot of the other genes we've talked about, being
Mhm.
GST, SOD2, et
Mhm.
cetera, that creates toxin buildup, and toxin buildup can create inflammation. And those things are what create plaque buildup, calcification, in the arteries, right? So this is all one big map, and all these things really matter. So nitric oxide, like I was saying, that's a very important element. And then there's another one called ACE that we look at, angiotensin converting enzyme. That plays another really big role in how your body sort of relaxes and contracts those blood vessels. So those two genes in particular play a big role in what blood pressure looks like person by person. I'll go over one more quick here because that's also really important. So PCSK9 matters here as well for this equation. And PCSK9, it really regulates LDL in another way, right? So it binds to the LDL receptors on the liver surface. And by controlling the number of LDL receptors, PCSK9 indirectly controls blood cholesterol, right? So PCSK9 with the ApoE gene and with these other factors, that's really how we kind of map out the cardiovascular system. And then when we add in the new genes, which Dr. K is going to start speaking to in a second, of course, that really helps to round out the picture, because all of our anti-inflammatory genes like vitamin D synthesis, these things are going to matter a lot for your overall cholesterol picture. Did I miss anything there, Dr. K?
No, I think you did a spectacular. I'm computing, but no, I think that was a beautiful, beautiful walk around the park there.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. So as Justin said, I'm now going to start into one of our new genes called MLXIPL. And for my own sake, I'm just going to call it MLX. So MLX it's a gene that's going to create an enzyme that lives mostly within your liver. And what this guy does, especially different ways it can be coded, is it will trigger some people to, in response to a large dose of carbohydrate, create a lot more triglycerides. Okay, so what are triglycerides? Tri means three, glyceride sugar. It's a way of storing excess sugar in fat. This is something that oftentimes when you go to your GP and they're like, oh, I've done, your HDL, your LDL, they'll also include triglycerides. Okay, so with this gene, this is one of the control points that when you take in larger dosings of carbohydrate, how happy is your liver to be converting that into triglycerides, into a storage. Now, here's the tricky thing, especially with the North American diet, where we have glorious, incredible amounts of carbohydrate, right? This means your liver is going to be working overtime to convert a lot of that into triglycerides. That becomes a burden not only on the body, remember, a lot of that is going to be circulating. You can take that into your blood sample because it's circulating throughout the body, kind of bubbling around. But additional to that, that creates a higher cardiovascular strain as well as a higher liver strain. I want to talk about this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. This is something that historically, and I'm talking, 50, 60, 70 years ago, historically we kind of associated almost exclusively with alcoholics, right? So people who have substance use issues with alcohol would be consuming incredible amounts of alcohol. They would start to experience cirrhosis within the liver. One of the mechanisms toward this, there's many when alcohol is in the picture, but one of the mechanisms is associated to this MLX in that alcohol sugar and the stress of that alcohol is shifting and increasing the triglycerides. And those triglycerides are because they're being created in the liver, absorbed and stored as well in the liver. Okay. And so what happens here is that you start to accumulate all of this fat in the liver. For this instance, think about the liver like a sponge, okay? When the liver is doing its job of cleaning, you need a sponge that is clean, that is not full of fat. But the more fat you're putting into this sponge, the poorer capacity it has, and the poorer capacity it has to do all of the things, the cleaning, that the liver should do. Okay. So unfortunately, with a poor presentation of MLX, both sugar and both sugar and alcohol is really going to be driving the liver towards creating more of those triglycerides, and unfortunately, in that sponge-like way, holding on to them. And so this is why, again, 50, 60, 70 years ago, we associated alcohol, fatty liver with alcoholics. But now, as our sugars are coming up in parallel, oftentimes to our alcohols, we're starting to see this in non-alcoholics. So we're starting to see this liver. When I look at statistics across the US, they vary, but approximately 25 to 30% of Americans have either full-blown or early stage fatty liver disease. Okay. So those with the genetic presentation of MLX that push them towards that more sensitive side, the side where they're going to receive those large amounts of carbohydrates and quickly make those triglycerides, they are at greater risk. We see that in studies. So as you're looking at your app, you're looking at the presentation, the risk allele here is C for Charlie. And so those in particular with a CC presentation, Charlie, Charlie, okay, they are most unfortunately at risk of, in the presence of high carbohydrate and high alcohol, to be creating those triglycerides that over time are problematic to cardiovascular health and problematic to liver health, right?
Yeah.
Justin?
Well, and liver health is there's such a cascade that takes place once you have compromised liver health,
Yeah.
right? I mean, your liver plays such a big role in your ability to digest fatty acids in the first place. A lot of people go straight to the gut microbiome, but understand that your liver is what makes the bile that helps you to digest those fats. Your liver is what does most of your T4 to T3 conversion for your thyroid. So if your thyroid gets compromised, guess what? Your metabolism goes with it, right? So like there's something called metabolic syndrome, and I don't think there's like a perfect definition of it because there's a few different kind of moving parts to it. But like, yeah, high triglycerides or like, and then a high BMI, high blood pressure, all of these things together constitute metabolic syndrome. So when we have disruptions in our metabolism based on these just basic systems of the body, it can really impede detox, all kinds of different stuff. You can end up with gut dysbiosis as a downstream effect. So all of these systems matter for the next system, and your liver is like way more critical than just detoxifying things. A lot more going on with that.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. Actually, I really value there that you kind of listed out because I think you're right. We pigeonhole the liver into this idea of exclusively cleaning things, and it contributes so much more than just, being a sponge, however apt that analogy may be. Yeah. Yeah, no. So
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. And so, when we talk about the cardiovascular system, the health of the cardiovascular system, I think that's part of why we zoom out as far as we do, right? Because I think a lot of people in this conversation, they'll zoom right in on metrics and
Hmm.
LDL numbers, HDL numbers, ApoB numbers, et cetera. But there's underlying systems that are of a lot of relevance here. And the more that you can keep those healthy by understanding
Yeah.
genes and epigenetics, that's what tends to self-regulate these systems, right? Keeping your detox well, keeping your inflammation low, keeping your metabolism right with the right macronutrients, micronutrients. I know that these carbohydrates that we're eating, I mean, a lot of them are causing insulin issues as well. And we know that blood sugar regulation is so important for cardiovascular health also. So it's like across the board, we need to make sure that we're eating real food that's in alignment with our genes.
Hmm.
And that makes a really big difference for all the different nutrients we take in. And one nutrient that we don't take in dietary wise that's very important is vitamin D, right? It's a
Hmm.
vitamin, but it's really a hormone. So we also have a new gene that's really of relevance for that. I don't know if you want to go ahead and dive into the next one yet.
I do, yeah. So the next gene that we're going to be talking about is DHCR7. I'll probably just call it DHC. A lot of letters tonight, audience. And so this is part of, as Justin mentioned, vitamin D is not just one thing, it's a hormone and then some. And it goes through many points of biotransformation, right? In the body, we kind of hear about this a little bit. I think most people have heard like, oh, vitamin D2 is not the active vitamin D. So if you're supplementing, you want to take vitamin 3 because that's active, right? So this is part of that bioconversion process, getting us to the point where we have that D3 that then helps in the body with all of the things that we want vitamin D to be doing. In particular, this is really tied to cardiovascular and immune wellness, right? I think honestly, vitamin D could probably be in every single webinar that we do because it is important to almost every single thing, but especially cardiovascular in terms of how those tissues are developing and how they are able to self-manage and differentiate. So, what does DHC tell us? So at some point, especially when you're being exposed to specific light, and again, this is assuming you live below a certain point, you're getting sufficient sunlight, right? But when you get specific light, what this gene helps decide is, are you going to kick your vitamin D precursors, which are cholesterol, spoiler, involved in cholesterol, sorry, are you going to kick those to the vitamin D pathway so that you can start converting to that active D3? Or are you going to kick some of those precursors down the cholesterol pathway? Okay. Now, audience, let's be very specific here. Oftentimes, when we hear about cholesterol, we think of it as a bad thing, right? We hear so often about high cholesterol, bad for heart health, right? But cholesterol, when we think about it in a managed way, in a way that the body wants it, it's incredibly important to many different body processes. Justin, do you want to talk about, before I continue on with this gene, do you want to talk about why cholesterol is so very important and why it can't always be vilified?
Absolutely. And it's one of those things, right? Like cortisol gets vilified, but it's massively important. Cholesterol gets vilified, but it's massively important. Cholesterol is the literal backbone to all of your sex hormones, right? So we have a certain amount of hormones that are made out of lipids, and you need that cholesterol present in order to actually build them. It's the raw building blocks that your body uses. Our brain is made out of fat. Our cell membranes are made out of fat. You could do your body no greater disservice than to cut out all sources of cholesterol. It's not about just taking in cholesterol too, because your liver health matters as well for this conversation, right? The liver plays a really big role in all of these different syntheses. So if you have no cholesterol intake, part of the problem is that you're missing what you're made out of, right? Your cells are made out of it. Your brain, your hormones are made out of it. And it is exactly what activates vitamin D, which is majorly
Mhm.
anti-inflammatory. If
Mhm.
you don't have enough anti-inflammatory action in the body, it can compromise your heart health. And I think this is one of the things that's really an irony about mainstream
Mhm.
medicine. Some people still talk about cholesterol as being like a direct contributor to cardiovascular disease. And we know that independently, it is not a risk factor. When you zoom out, it can be a contributor if the circumstances are just right for it to be a contributor. So, large amount of cholesterol intake alongside, let's say, processed food intake, a lot of toxins, a lot of inflammation, then absolutely too much cholesterol in the diet can be a problem. But understand that the complete absence of it is just as big of a problem because you're negating your own building blocks, including what you need for the vitamin D pathway, which is so important. I mean, 70% of the population is deficient in vitamin D. What a huge contributor to all disease states, in
Mhm.
my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So what DHCR7 is looking at is really, how happy are you to be taking these cholesterol precursors and shunting towards vitamin D production compared to shunting more towards cholesterol pathways. So those with G alleles, Gregory alleles, they tend towards the lowest vitamin D production, instead more favoring towards cholesterol production. Those with TT alleles, they shunt more towards, relatively speaking, more towards that vitamin D production compared to that cholesterol pathway. Okay, so I would offer, it's a bit tricky to say which is the better one, which is the worst one, because both tend to be really important. Instead, I would offer it as it's important you know this. So not only can you better support your vitamin D, but you can also ensure that your cholesterol is in good check. So what's an example of this? Someone with, let's say, a chronic illness, right? So someone who maybe has long haul COVID, something to that effect. We know that over time, one of the stress responses of the body is to actually increase the production of cholesterol. because, as Justin went through, it's kind of the body's attempt at being like, I know I need cholesterol for everything. It's really important for everything. So I'm just going to make a lot of it. And hopefully that's going to fix it. We know it doesn't really, it can contribute to the solution, but over the long period, that's not great for cardiovascular health. But that's one thing the body's trying to do. So if you know that and you're going through a long-term illness, this shifts how regularly and how focused you might need to be on your vitamin D, because especially if you're someone that is shunting more towards cholesterol production, which the body is seeking, that puts a little bit more at risk, that lacking of vitamin D, right? Again, it's not by itself enough to be like, oh, you only do one or the other. It's that delicate balance, but it really informs to me when your body is struggling, what things do we need to be monitoring all the more for, because you're set up, your body's designed in a way to be going one pathway over the other. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a bigger map, right? It's like I think even the vitamin D conversation can be oversimplified. There's a few different moving parts to it.
Mhm.
Everything from where you live, right, to how much actual outside time you get and where you live. And then we already looked at three different genes there, right? So we looked at CYP2R1, which converts the D2 to the D3 using cholesterol. And then we have GCVDBP, and that's what delivers the now active vitamin D to the receptor site, and then VDR, that's the receptor site itself. Each one of these is enzymatically encoded, and the genes that have the same namesake are what do that encoding. So knowing the genes can really influence this. Then
Mhm.
we add in this new gene to really understand the shunting, right? Vitamin D and cholesterol. When we zoom out a little bit, there's other moving factors here too. I mentioned enos, right? Nitric oxide is what sort of helps release it from adipose tissue. So if you have suboptimal nitric oxide genetics, that can impact it. There's cofactors to consider, right? So there's things like vitamin A. We have genes associated with that too, BCMO1. We look at, there's also things like K2 to consider. You don't want to take lots of vitamin D3 in the absence of K2, especially if you have the 3,4 in the ApoE, because vitamin D can calcify at high levels, right? So the K2 helps to prevent that. Magnesium matters there, right? That's one of those other cofactors that kind of activates the vitamin D. So much bigger conversation than a lot of practitioners still have, right? They just kind of give you an IU dosage, but not a dosing protocol and not zooming out and understanding all of the moving parts. Vitamin D is so important that it deserves and warrants a bigger conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the things that I really love our vitamin D profile for is exactly what you've said there, right? Doctors right now, when they're not informed by the genetics of vitamin D, they'll do really high doses and with good intention, right? With oh dear, you're low, we better megadose you because we know it's so important. But that doesn't always work for all people. I get often coming to my desk, as well as I would imagine yours, Justin, people who say, I have low vitamin D. I've done exactly what the doctor says, but we're not seeing those numbers move. And amazingly, the mystery tends to be solved in, well, let's dose based on your genes and your blood work, right? It's always that combination. We never dose just alone on blood work. We never dose just alone on genes. It's that happy little marriage between the two that tends to get people back in that good space for vitamin D.
Yeah, I've seen it a lot. You incorporate the genetic information and simple spacing of doses. I've seen pretty magical results with, like
Mhm.
the same IUs, just spaced differently based on understanding what the genetic profile looks like, has helped a lot of people to raise it up and get it where we actually want it to be. So little tricks and tactics can go a pretty long way with this.
Yeah. All right. I think we should quickly talk through our last gene of the night before we jump into all our happy little questions and answers. Does that sound fair?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do it. So SIP182, is that the one we're tackling?
It is. All
All
right.
right.
So, audience, this is going to be again in your inflammation in the system summary section. Okay, so CYP1A2 does several things, but what I want to focus on this evening is going to be very specific to cardiovascular wellness. And so CYP1A2 is an enzyme of oh, my brain is going to get there. 1 second, audience. There we go. An enzyme of the liver. And what this helps us do, it helps us process caffeine. Okay. There's going to be two presentations here, one of which that is going to be slower in how it processes, and the other where it's going to be a quick processing. So the one that really ties into cardiovascular wellness is going to be the slower processing. And why is that? So you wake up in the morning and you have your beautiful cup of coffee. It's my favorite meal of the day. So you have your cup of coffee and you know that that's going to deliver based on how strong that coffee is, so many milligrams of caffeine. Okay. Now, we know that not all bodies are going to receive, for the sake of argument, let's just say 50 milligrams of caffeine. We know that not all bodies are going to receive that 50 milligrams the same. Some people are going to sit there and let's pretend that, people are used to drinking coffee in the morning. We're not talking about someone who's never had it before, which that will always be a shock to the system. We're talking about our happy little coffee drinkers. Some people who have that, their bodies are going to sit there and be like, wow, that's a lot of caffeine. And I feel that for a really long time. I have my cup in the morning, that lasts me all day. There's going to be other people on the spectrum that are like, yeah, I have my coffee. It feels good for a few hours, and then I could probably have another one, right? And while there's many factors that go into that, one of the factors that I want to focus on today is the CYP1A2. It looks at how quickly you're breaking it down. For those that are slower at breaking it down, that caffeine is staying in the body significantly longer than those that are breaking it down quickly. What this has been tied to when we talk about cardiovascular outcomes is people with slow processing of caffeine, and they're having higher amounts of caffeine, right? So usually this exceeds just 1 cup of coffee per day. Depends on the study, but we're talking in the space of 2 to 4 to 5 cups. Again, it'll depend on the person. There's a few other variables, but those people that are consistently having more caffeine, even though they have slow processing of it, we are seeing higher rates of blood pressure, and over time that lends to higher risk of cardiovascular event, unfortunately, like heart attack. Because this consistent chronic elevation of blood pressure that this caffeine is creating, because the caffeine's hanging out longer than it should be, is lending to the wear and the tear and the pressure on all of your arteries, veins, and heart. Yeah. So it's something to be mindful of when you're looking at your report of, especially if you're experiencing high blood pressure, especially if your other genes that Justin has so beautifully articulated tonight that lend to, that coding the rhino versus whatever other car reference
Alignment.
coding. Yeah. Yeah. When you're thinking through, I have the 6G, what things can I be doing? You want to know what this gene says, because it can influence especially how much caffeine you should be having throughout the course of your morning. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's plenty of strategies, right? If you happen to be that slower metabolizer, I mean, if you still want to have a cup of Joe, you could always do caffeine cycling. I mean, I'm a fan of doing like 4 on, 3 off kind of strategies to keep the adenosine receptors a little bit more sensitive.
Mhm.
Understand too that really anything that stimulates the HPA axis in the body, that's going to directly impact things like HRV, right?
Mhm.
Like HRV is not a perfect measurement. It's tough to get like a real measurement there, but HRV is certainly one of those things that we look at with regard to cardiovascular health as it's tied into the nervous system and how that all works. When you drink caffeine and you get cortisol, adrenaline is also co-released with cortisol, right? So you're really getting that HPA axis activated, and usually that's one of many things throughout the day that activates that stress response in the body as well, right?
Mhm.
Stress and
I agree.
cardiovascular outcomes, those things are married for life, married with children, right? Forever and ever, those two things.
Yeah.
And so I also sort of loop in the ADRA2B gene to this a little bit as well, because if you have
Mhm. I like
deletion,
that.
right, in the ADRA2B gene, that is the noradrenaline receptor. Noradrenaline is adrenaline. So when we have cortisol co-released with adrenaline and we have suboptimal deletion in the receptor site, that can make it so that caffeine is one of those things that makes you quite anxious as well. Anxiety causes more cortisol, and we end up with this cascade. So knowing how your body processes that caffeine with that CYP1A2 can be really relevant for even your caffeine intake, how your body is processing different things that can in fact tax your heart in an indirect way more so than a direct way. So just know that all these genes, even stuff in the mood and behavior, is connected. All of these things are connected, and
Yeah.
I love that. It's a big old puzzle that we get to dissect on a daily.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think I love that you kind of brought in other genes too, because sometimes, you'll see someone with a beautiful cardiovascular report, right? And so far as they don't have one specific gene or other that puts them at exceptional risk, but they'll still have high blood pressure, high blood sugars, high, high, high. And part of that, as you're highlighting, Justin, is because of other contributors to the system, which aren't always as intuitive or as it's kind of sucks when you hear it's your stress that's making your blood pressure and your heart struggle.
Yeah, it is. And I think that it's important though to understand because so I was having this conversation just the other day with a patient about when your genes are optimal in an area, we need to zoom out and look at all of them because optimal cardiovascular genes are great. But if you were to have optimal cardiovascular genes and every other things, poor methylation, poor detoxification, poor vitamin D, you can still end up with a cardiovascular issue, right? It's not like it isn't. The
Mhm.
conversation I was having with a patient was actually about TCF7L2 and the insulin response. And I was having a
Mhm.
session with him and I said, you have genetically a good insulin response, but I know based on clinical correlation, he does not have a good diet, right? But I'm good
Mhm.
there, kind of a thing. And I said, well, pump the brakes, right? Because your epigenetics can still override this. So we still want to be mindful that just because you have optimal TCF7L2, that doesn't mean guaranteed no blood sugar regulation
Yeah.
issues at all,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
still take things with a grain of Himalayan sea salt. Um, and
You're
just
so
know that we need
fancy.
to look at all of the genes and all the presentations and your epigenetics, and that's what's going to matter the most.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. All right. Shall we, I guess, do you have any other pearls you want to drop on the audience before we jump into our Q's and A's?
No, I think that it's just a matter of understanding that as we add in new genes, it's an expansion of the picture that we already have. We've got the DNA 360, right? We've got a fantastic,
Mhm.
well-rounded view, but little nuggets and things can still be unturned here, right? We're trying to make sure that we leave no stones unturned. And
Mhm.
that way we can give you the best 360-degree snapshot of what your health is doing. So little genes are going to be added here and there as they get unveiled. We're going to do webinars and we're going to link them into the current presentation. And it's just a
Mhm.
growing body of knowledge that is genomics. And it's one of the
Mhm.
most fascinating things in health right now. So I'm glad you guys are all here and just keep your eyes on the webinars and what we're doing. I'm glad you're
Mhm.
part of it because this is going to continue to expand and we're going to give you the best info up to date all the time. I love this stuff. New genes are exciting because we've been talking about the same ones for a couple of years now. So as we
Yeah.
add, I'm stoked as a practitioner to do this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We have some very exciting developments in the new year when it comes to new genes. So I'm excited to be offering those to everyone, and I'm excited for Justin to be explaining them to everyone because you have a gift with that, sir.
Thank you.
All right, shall we jump into some of the Q&As? Dirk has our first question, and
Hey,
Dirk
Dirk.
is, hey Dirk, indeed. For those that are new to our webinars, we have a lot of, I lovingly call them frequent offenders. Dirk is amongst our probably top frequent offender, probably on that most wanted list. So Dirk is saying, and I think this references when we were opening the conversation with, things that your doctor is going to be looking at in terms of cardiovascular wellness. Um, and he's saying most of the discussion on heart disease seems to be centered on coronary artery disease. So, a lot of that thickening, stiffening, plaques, things of that nature. There seems to be a large increase in recent years of heart rhythm issues like atrial fibrillation. Are there any genes specifically related to rhythm issues? And why have rhythm issues become more prominent and the root cause of prevention? There's a few answers to that. I think within media, rhythm issues have become a bit more popular because they tended to be one of the many side effects, both of COVID and the vaccination that were being reported. And so I think there was a little bit of fanfare around that, and not in a bad way. I think it opens the door to other considerations of heart health. So when it comes to genes that specifically speak to that, we do not have any currently, nor will we in the release of our new genes, have any that speak to rhythm issues except outside of kind of contributors for, right? One of the big precursors to atrial fibrillation and other sorts of pathologies tends to unfortunately be heart attack. right? Once you damage some of that heart muscle, you run a greater risk for some of these rhythm abnormalities. So we speak to them indirectly in that sense. In terms of genes that directly speak to that, we don't do disease-defining genes in that sense, and so those aren't really part of our current panel, but we do speak a lot to genes that unfortunately can lead to a heart attack, which then almost inevitably you'll have some sort of arrhythmia after the fact. Yeah, yeah. All right. Justin, before we move on to the next question, did you want to share an opportunity and something for our audience?
Yes. So basically, we have a discount for everybody here tonight, and it's a 15% discount on the DNA 360. So it's one of those things where if you need, like, if you've not done it before and you're on this webinar, then you're going to understand these webinars a heck of a lot better when you have the DNA 360, because we're talking about the genes, we go through them. So if you look in the chat, there is actually the link to the 15% discount. It's 6 genes at checkout, and it gets you 15% off. So take advantage. It's a good thing to do for your health moving into the new year.
Love it. Yeah. All right. So, Justin, I'll take the next question if you want to take the one following that.
Sure.
So our next question is coming from Sheila, and she's asking, do we currently test genes that correlate with lipoprotein A? So this has become really famous. It's another cholesterol-carrying particle within the blood, and it has been associated with different cardiovascular outcomes. In particular, it raises risk for cardiovascular events like heart attack, stroke, etc. So something that we really care about and will really influence those risks. So Sheila, currently we do not. In future reports that are coming in the new year, we do. So right now, it's something just to stay attuned to DNA Company through email and through other conversations, and we'll let you know when those are coming.
Absolutely. And I'll actually combine these next two questions. So we have a couple. Nancy asked, what does AG mean for 9p21? And then Robin said, I have 1p21 in the cardiovascular report, AG, which is supposed to be good, but then has the 9p21, which is 5G, which is among the more problematic genotypes. So for yourself, Nancy, just double check, because I believe that you may be looking at the 1p21 gene, because 9p21 wouldn't have any A alleles in there. It's only going to be the Gs, right? So I mentioned 0 to 6G. That's what we're looking at for 9p21. But then there's a secondary mover there called 1p21, where basically it's going to, there's two alleles that you can have there. So A is normal. There's no bad allele for 1p21. It's either common and normal, and it doesn't really give you any extra benefit, which is the A. Or if you have the G present, including AG, then that adds additional cardiovascular protection. So that's what the 1p21 does, but there's a 9p21 and a 1p21, and it gets a little confusing in there. That would be the difference between those two.
Yeah, love it. I love that. Thank you. All right. So Angelica has our next question, and they're asking, is there such thing as too low blood pressure, and how can this negatively impact a 4G status of 9p21? So Angelica, the answer is depends. So especially with women, namely women who are females who are menstruating, because of the presence of estrogen, there tends to be a lower blood pressure within those populations. You'll also see lower blood pressures within athletically trained people. So Justin, I would suspect, probably has a lower blood pressure relative to the population. You'll also see lower blood pressures in, interestingly, people who really take up meditative practices and other stress management practices. And you'll sometimes also see it in the ill population. There are several chronic illnesses that unfortunately over time you'll see a lower blood pressure. Now, the reason I'm saying is this, maybe it depends on circumstances. By and large, a lower blood pressure is a bit helpful, right? It's less stress and strain on the body. What you do need to be concerned, though, is if it's low to the point where you experience being lightheaded, and potentially that creates a bit of a risk in the sense that you're falling. So there is potential for blood pressure to being too low, and that's really where you start to have that conversation with your doctor as to what's your actual blood pressure and what is your day-to-day experience. Do you feel lightheaded when you stand up? If that's an instance like that, that requires some investigation. So it's not a black and white answer. It's something I'd encourage you to talk to your provider about. And if you don't have a provider, feel free to reach out to us and we can have that conversation with you as well. Yeah. All right. Who's next on deck, Justin?
Looks like where are we at here? Sorry, the Q&A thing moves as we answer them. So Susan has the next one. What are your thoughts on Arterosil and Vasonex from Calroy? My understanding is that those are there for like nitric oxide and for like to help with the dilation of blood pressure. Am I correct or incorrect on that, Dr. K?
Our arterial cell specifically is, I can speak to our arterial cell if you can speak to the other one.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll start with arterial cell. It's I don't remember the exact compound name, but it's a seaweed extract, and it has been studied to, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, audience, but I'm really going to try. It has been shown to support the glycohelix, not said correctly, but the glycohelix elements within your blood vessel lining. So let me break that down, what I just meant there. In your that first layer of cell that really 9p21 speaks to in terms of how likely are you to be inflamed. There's many different cells that make up that layer. One of them is called glycocalyx or something really close to that. And this seaweed extract is shown to actually support the regeneration and maintenance of this. And so once you hit mid 20s, early 30s in those space, it will really vary by person. You start to see a decline in this, regardless of genetic presentation. It's kind of a result of wear and tear on the body. So this is one of the rare compounds that are founded to support that. So for people in particular with a poor 9p21 presentation, where there's only so many things you can do, this can be an incredible adjunct to help with that layer that's more prone to inflammation. Yeah. Do you want to talk on the other guy, Justin?
Yeah, so my understanding is that I think Vasonex is how it's pronounced, is that it's really like a combinatory supplement of various nitric oxide precursors, right? So this would be relative to the NOS3 gene that I mentioned before. So nitrates, right, and beetroot and berry complexes and black garlic and those kinds of things. Personally, anytime that you can improve circulation via nutritive substrates, I'm a fan of that approach. That's one of the things that I do myself, with citrulline, arginine, agmatine sulfate, ornithine is great. There's a lot of things that are actually nutritive that can do that, including just eating beets and watermelon and berries and these kinds of things. So I've never actually used Vasonex, but just based on looking at some of the ingredients, I'm a fan of what they put in there, and I suspect that it would be valuable. These are things that can be combined with exercise, red light therapy. It's important that you have enough high quality sodium in your diet. These things all matter for that vasodilation as well. Remember, every time that you lose water in any format in your body, you're also losing those minerals, right? And those minerals really matter. They're conductors of electricity, and they help to dilate the blood vessels a bit as well. So definitely get, if you've got the itch, then give it a try, because nitric oxide matters a ton for everything we talked about tonight.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to take, I think, the next 3 questions at least and kind of aggregate them into one conversation. So Lynn is saying that she has a suboptimal presentation of MLX, and yet her triglycerides tend to be very low. What's up with that? The next question is, like, with MLX, especially, what can encourage it? Is it only large carb loads? I'll speak to that. And then the last question from Margaret is, are all carbs created equal? If I have a large simple carb meal compared to a large complex sugar meal, is it all created equal? So what is getting at here is really, these questions are getting at this idea that diet is so very important. just like Justin was talking about with TCF7L2, which is something we know that if you have a poor presentation of that gene in the presence of the wrong diet, that can really encourage diabetes, just like a good presentation of that gene, but with a bad diet that will also encourage diabetes, right? And so this is the idea that you can have a really bad presentation of MLX, but if your diet's on point, you're not necessarily going to be presenting in a negative way because you're not fueling the fire of a poor gene. And to get to Jennifer and Margaret's point, right? It not all carbs are created equal. So the first question was, is it only with large carb loads? Think about what carbs can be. I think Margaret's getting at this. Alcohol is, while there's more to it than just carbs, it is an incredible carb load on the body that will really trigger MLX. Just like in especially, think about anything that's really going to be spiking your blood sugars. All of those blood sugars have to be managed by the liver. And so if you're doing something that really spikes your blood sugars, that's going to be creating this burden for this gene for the liver. So again, not all carbs are created equal, as Margaret was getting at, right? If you're having a complex carb meal and coupled to that are other fats and proteins, and so that blood sugar spike is going to be lower over time, you're not going to be triggering it in the same way as if you sit down with ice cream and wine and candy and, all the other holiday goodies, right? Audience, we're going into the holiday season. Whatever it is you celebrate, there's going to be lots of goodies around. Be mindful of what these goodies might be doing to your liver and to your MLX. Yeah.
Dr. Laura and I just did a webinar all about holiday eating, by the way. So
Oh, did you?
you may
Yeah.
want to go back and check that one out for some assistance.
Yeah. Vanny, if you're able, maybe we link that in the chat. It's a good and timely reminder because sometimes it's nice to have your head in the sand and pretend that genes don't exist, but it doesn't, not a good long-term plan. Yeah. All right. Justin, do you want to grab the next question?
Sure. So Sheila is saying that if we have the MLXCC, are there any supplements that can help support our liver or bile support as well? So absolutely. I mean, I mentioned earlier in the call about the whole bile circulation thing, right? It's called enterohepatic circulation. The liver makes the bile and then it gives it to the gallbladder. The gallbladder doesn't make bile; it just distributes it. It's like an intelligent little storage unit for it. And when you eat fats and things, then the gallbladder will just distribute it to help you to digest those fatty acids. Any level of liver congestion will make it so that you're not getting that proper enterohepatic circulation. So I'm a really big fan of using a few different things to help boost that up. One of my favorites would be TUDCA. I like TUDCA for the liver. It's also great for the mitochondria. There's a few things that it does. I take like a 500 milligram TUDCA thing most of the time because in my labs, I had elevated urinary bile acids. So that means that there's spillover of those UBAs, and that's indicative of liver congestion. So that's great. I think that, any of these glutathione precursors are very valuable as well, being NAC, selenium, alpha lipoic acid, glycine, glutamine. These things can be really useful for that. Silymarin is the actual term for the nutrient, but that's like a milk thistle extract. That's been proven to be a pretty good ingredient for a lot of people as well. I think that the rest of the liver equation would be like basic hydration tactics, right? Good quality minerals, trying to keep as many pharmaceuticals out of the picture as you can, right? Understanding that sometimes we can't avoid it. But the ibuprofens, the things that really gum it up, if you're taking them on a daily basis, it's a lot about what you don't take in is how you keep your liver healthy as well. But yeah, check out TUDCA, NAC, etc. Those are all great ingredients for that.
Yeah. All right. The next few questions are kind of asking around different alleles and what they mean. So for MLXIPL, G as in Gregory tends to be the optimal allele, C as in Charlie, the suboptimal allele. If you're a heterozygous, which means you have one of each, it tends to lean a little bit more towards the negative side, but you're not as bad as having a full-blown CC, okay? For DHCR7, T as in Tom is the optimal allele there. The The risk allele is G as in Gregory. And again, it's that same distribution. GG is going to be shunting more towards cholesterol compared to vitamin D. TT is going to be more shunting towards cholesterol. Towards vitamin D compared to cholesterol. So close, audience. And the heterozygous, the GT is going to be, I believe that leans a little bit more towards cholesterol production. Yeah. Okay. All right. Justin, do you want to go over the next question there? I think it might be Sheila.
Or is it Sharon?
Oh, I need new glasses. I keep saying this every webinar when I have to look long distances.
There is a Sheila in the audience, though. Shout out to Sheila, but this one is Sharon.
Thank
So
you.
Sharon basically shared that you have high cholesterol and LDL. Triglycerides are doing okay. Did a coronary calcium test and it was 0. So looks good considering Sharon's 75. So hey, you're doing a lot of things right, but has high LPA and apolipoprotein B, and basically just wondering about the genetic connections there. So if I had to guess, we don't guess here, we test, but if I had to make an observation, I would consider all of the detoxification genes. I would say that it's possible that there's contributing factors within the rest of your genomic report, right? Like poor detox, poor, anti-inflammatory action. The TCF7L2 insulin response can be implicated there. If you have an ApoE34, that can matter there as well. Genes are not correlated directly to labs in that way, right?
Yeah, I would offer for lipoprotein A specifically, it's almost entirely, if not exclusively related to genes. So that one very much influenced by genes, and we'll have new genes that come out and speak on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and the rest of it is just managing the rest of the epigenetic profile with what it looks like, right? None of these exist in a vacuum. And you could have ideal ApoE and NOS3, but like I say, you could have poor methylation, poor vitamin D synthesis, etc. And these things that cause the inflammation can cause the reason for your body to distribute more cholesterol, right? It recognizes that as part of the immune response effectively. It's just your body says, "Oh, we're inflamed. Let's give us some more of this soothing agent to deal with it." So it's like I say, identify the arsonist, look at the webinars that we've done specified to inflammation and toxin clearance. And you're always welcome to get a session with one of us as well, because we can go nice and deep into the whole DNA 360 and see if we could tackle that for you.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Marianne's asking our next question. They're saying that they have a poor MLX presentation, and they're wondering if they can, and I'm putting this in my own words, effectively bargain with the devil. They're hoping that over the holidays they could include a few specific treats, and they're wondering, if I make this drink in this way with kind of these things that aren't necessarily registering as high in sugar and whatnot to the liver and to the body, can I get away with it? And I'll be honest, unfortunately, Marianne, once you're kind of introducing alcohol into the body, regardless how you're kind of trying to couch that, it still triggers the same biochemical pathways. So unfortunately, this isn't something that you really get to bargain with, independent of how many goodies you tuck in with that drink. So just something to be mindful of, in particular, if your liver's already in a place where it's not happy. Ideally, unfortunately, abstinence of alcohol and high sugar content is the best way to go. Yeah.
Yeah, I've spoken before on these webinars about alcohol alternatives that I'm personally a fan of, right? So like kava and ketone esters, and there's things called hard ketones. There's ways that you can avoid alcohol and the ethanol and all those problems that come alongside it, but still get some of that social lubricating effect. So like I'm a big fan of doing these mocktails, right, with different ingredients, and it's like that's how I do it. If we're gonna order the UFC pay-per-view or something, and it's like if other people are drinking, I'm just not going to, because I don't. But I can provide myself little options to at least get some of the effect without causing my body toxicity. So check out kava, Kava, and hard ketones. Those are cool little additions that might just function as an alternative.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you. All right. Marianne is saying they don't have the greatest presentation of NOS3. And they're curious what can be done in place of just kind of pounding a lot of arugula. So, Justin, you've gone through quite a few things that will raise nitric oxide. Do you want to offer some of that to Marianne?
Yeah, and arugula is great. It's a superfood. I'm a fan of arugula. I actually put it in my eggs on almost a daily basis. It's one of the veggies I
Oh.
choose for that. But one single nutritive ingredient isn't going to do nearly the job for nitric oxide as a bunch of them, right? So, like I mentioned, L-citrulline is fantastic. That's an amino acid. L-arginine is another one. Ornithine, agmatine sulfate, all of those are great. Beetroot extract. There's really different berries and watermelon and stuff like that that work. I mean, I'll shout out a product here. We're not affiliated with these guys, but I personally use one called Cardio Miracle. And it's effectively a bunch of different nitric oxide precursors with different antioxidants and anti-inflammatory agents. But have a look at the ingredient list of that one. You could probably piece it together on your own if you choose, or I've found pretty good success with Cardio Miracle. And then it's a matter of weightlifting. It's a matter of getting enough red light exposure,
Mm.
be that from the sun or a device. December, a device may be in your interest. Vibrating, right? Like I have this vibe plate thing, and vibration does help amplify nitric oxide in the body as well. So between all that, that should help at least get you moving in the right direction. Cialis is another thing, by the way, but it's like pharmaceutical, so I can't recommend it.
It's honest though. I mean, it was originally investigated for a cardiovascular issue. They just found a happy side effect.
Absolutely. NOS, man. It works for a lot
Mhm.
of stuff.
Yeah. Do you want to speak to Robin's question as well?
Sure. So how do you know how to read your vitamin D blood levels? So there's different tests, right? And there's varying accuracies to how they go. I'm guessing that, Robin, you're asking about testing and different testing. To my knowledge, 25 OH vitamin D testing is the most accurate that you can get. It's 25 hydroxy vitamin D. That's the best one. I know that it gives you a little bit more of a look into the kind of intracellular components there as well. So that's what I would recommend. There are companies out there now where you can do like, what the heck is it called? SpectraCell or SpectraCell or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's a really good quality one. And just make sure that it's the 25 OH vitamin D levels. This is going to vary throughout the year, right? And remember that there's a lot that goes into this vitamin D conversation as well, not just the IUs and how long you spent in the sun. There's a few things that activated, et cetera. So magnesium is another really important thing because we burn through it so much that magnesium gets depleted pretty easily in the body. And among its 300 plus enzymatic uses would be the activation of vitamin D. So make sure that there's a relatively consistent intake of that alongside the vitamin D3, K2, etc. But yeah, 25OH SpectraCell is a really good company for that.
And I think, Robin, if you're looking for kind of, I would offer power in numbers, right? You alone aren't supposed to be interpreting these results. And I'd really encourage that if you want some support, we're happy to help with that. And you can even meet with Justin if you want. So if you're looking for personalized support, please do reach out because a lot of this blood work interpretation, gene interpretation, we make it as consumer, as people friendly as we can, but nothing will ever replace you sitting down with a provider and talking about health goals. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay, so I'll take on the next question from Sarah. Justin, if you want to ready for Nancy's question. Sarah's asking, are we going to be adding any more new genes anytime soon? If so, uh, when and how many? The answer is yes. In the new year, we're going to be adding a whole whack of new genes. It's going to be really exciting. We're almost going to be we will be doubling, more than doubling how many we currently speak to right now. That's kind of why I've gone a little bit underground. I've been working on that. So in the new year, again, please keep your eyes to your email, to a lot of our announcements. We will be sharing details about that soon. So it's in the new year, and we'll be more than doubling how many genes we look into. And I promise we're going to ensure that it's easy for you to interpret that. We're not just going to dump a whole whack on you and be like, good luck. There'll be a lot of support and understanding those. Yeah.
Exciting times.
Mhm.
Okay. So Nancy has a question for us and basically said that she had a recent lipid test and it shows cholesterol is borderline high, triglycerides are very low, and HDL is actually the one that's extremely high and has been gradually increasing for years. Interesting. Um, Nancy's read that high HDL can be bad if it's too high and what causes it to be so high. So the way I look at this is that it's a cycle, right? It's supposed to be an efficient little cycle where it gets released from the liver by the LDL and then it gets pulled back by the HDL. So there could be a couple of different causes or reasons behind that. I would want to do like a more advanced kind of searching into what your lifestyle is and what your genes are suggesting. But things like liver congestion, which we talked about a lot tonight, that can influence this. Things like inflammation and toxicity that can influence it as well. So it's not necessarily a giant red flag, but when I see an imbalance there or something that's just chronically high and rising, to me, there's going to be a reason behind that. And I would say it could be liver related, it could be inflammation related. And again, identify the arsonist and see what actually needs the work. Dr. K, do you have any contribution to that?
I'd really say we'd want you to chat with someone because I think to Justin's point, there's so many reasons that things can be going a little bit amiss, and it would be wrong of us to be like, I think it's this or I think it's that. You really should talk to someone. So either the person that took that blood work, or if you want to connect with us, again, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to support that sort of stuff. But it'd be wrong of us to be like, we think it's this or that. We want to see all the gritty details for you.
That's the thing is there's something I call the that sounds like methodology when
Yeah.
practicing healthcare. And I don't think that there's a lot of wisdom behind it. Like you've seen that so many times, right? Well, that sounds like adrenal fatigue. Well, that
I
sounds,
know.
and that sounds like the thyroid. And then they run
Yeah.
a thyroid panel, and then, well, sure enough, maybe the thyroid's compromised. But then they go, all right, we found the problem, and then they treat the paper, and then they raise up the thyroid with some synthroid or something like that, and then they say job done. And you might feel better for a little bit, but then a few months later, because that wasn't necessarily the etiology of the imbalance, the problem ends up coming back, or it's just an incomplete solution, right?
Hmm.
So practitioners that do that sounds like methodology, I don't love it. And we do something that's very important called clinical correlation as well, right? So when you get an intake and you end up doing sessions with one of our clinicians, it's like we have a big long lifestyle medical history questionnaire to understand a lot of different things about you. I want to know how you sleep and how you eat and how your mindset is and what your history is. Then I want to know your genes, and then I connect the two before I even meet you, right? So that's why that format is really how you get to the bottom of these issues. We can't just say my lab said this and what's our opinion of it. It's going to be a pretty general opinion, but that's the opinion nonetheless. So I just wanted to kind of expand on that before we get into Sheila's question.
Yeah. All right. Sheila's asking if we can explain caffeine cycling. I think that was something that you initially brought up. Do you want to talk about cycling, my favorite meal of the day?
Yeah, it's mine as well. I
Is
love
it?
a good cup of Joe. It's good. I don't go crazy. I just have one cup of
Oh, I
coffee.
just have one. That's why it's my favorite because my body can only handle one.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think that high amounts of any stimulant is good for the HPA axis. So what I would say is caffeine cycling has to do with what I called the adenosine receptors earlier. And it's basically that our body has receptorship for any stimulants. And if you use them every day and you take in caffeine each and every day, then you're going to kind of lessen the response. You dampen the response. So you end up drinking your coffee and it just kind of gets you to that baseline because the adenosine receptors are not sensitive anymore, right? It's like insulin sensitivity. It's like one of these things that we want to keep it sensitive. So caffeine cycling, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can either, if you've been drinking caffeine for a super long time, you could just take a couple weeks off and just cold turkey it. Or what you could do to keep them more sensitive is do like a cyclical approach where you do a certain amount of days on and then you do a certain amount of days off where you still have coffee, but it's decaffeinated. Or you could, what I do is I kind of switch to do like a cacao tea or a mushroom tea or whatever. I like to do different hot beverages to make sure that I'm getting those adenosine receptors nice and sensitive when I have my caffeine is on the higher workload days. Boom, patient, boom, webinar, stuff to do, right? I like to have my caffeine on those days, but if it's kind of a slightly less crazy day, then that's a good day to do a decaf or do something else, some mud water or something like that. And that keeps them nice and sensitive. So like a 4 and 3 strategy is great, or just give her with caffeine and then take a full 2 weeks off to reset the adenosine receptors. Either strategy works.
Mhm. Great. All right, I'm going to speak to Robin's next question. She's asking what exactly is HRV. So this is something that Justin mentioned in passing. It stands for heart rate variability, and it's it's kind of a neat way, I think, especially like when we think about wearable technology, something that has really been brought into the mainstream. So HRV is speaking to, usually when you go to a doctor, they'll take your pulse and they're saying like, oh, you have a heart rate of 70 beats per minute. That means they're feeling that beat of your heart 70 times over the course of that minute. And when you hear that, you kind of assume that that beating is in an equal measure. And for the musicians out there, we know that, or at least for people that have felt pulses, we know that that's not true. Sometimes the beats are going to be a bit closer together. Sometimes they're going to be further apart. And so what heart rate variability looks at is how consistently are you keeping more or less the same space between those beats. And we being the science, we have said, lower heart rate variability is really tied to stress, busy minds, infection, overthinking, inflammation, and just a lot of sympathetic and parasympathetic dysregulation. So it's starting to be tied to a lot of more negative cardiovascular outcomes. Okay. And so a lot of devices can measure this. We expect over the course of a life of it to drop a little bit, but there are some good gauges based on your age bracket, where you expect that to be on the regular. Obviously, if you don't sleep well, it's going to drop the next day, but in the consistency. So it's a fun, different way to be looking into heart health. And it kind of gets a little bit to what Dirk was saying, in that we're looking beyond now cholesterol and other sorts of things into heart rhythm. Yeah. Justin, did you want to add anything else to that?
I will say that HRV is also a metric that I really like for overtraining, right? Because it has a lot to do with that nervous system regulation. And so, like when there's a disruption in HRV, which I use an Oura ring myself, there's different ways to measure it. But when the HRV starts to tank, that's one of the kind of metrics that I use. I'm very intuitive about training and then taking recovery days, like parasympathetic days. And HRV is one of those metrics that I use for that, and I find it quite valuable. So understand that it's both a cardiovascular metric and a nervous system metric, something that you can keep your eyes on alongside grip strength and stuff like that. That's what I use to monitor whether or not I should kill myself in the gym today, or if I should just maim myself instead.
That's really funny to me. Yeah. All right. So Susan has our next question. I'll just quickly speak to it, and it's clarifying for CYP1A2. And so to be clear around this CYP1A2, if you have an AA Andrew presentation, you're going to be a faster rate. If you have a C Charlie, you're going to be that slower rate. And they're saying that the gene, it sounds like there might be a little bit of a mix-up in our gene podcast. So Susan, I'm going to take that back, and I'm going to have the team look at, is there accidentally a crosswire in the gene podcast? And we will update that. So thank you for reporting that. All right. And I think that actually also answers our next question from John, just speaking to which alleles. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. What question is next there, Justin?
Okay, so we've got, it looks like another allele question from Nancy. So Nancy is asking about the alleles for PCSK9, for ACE, and for NOS3. So for NOS3, the G is optimal and the T is what's suboptimal. So you could have a GT there. It's considered suboptimal. Just so you guys know, when we say that there is a suboptimal allele, that also means that if you have the medium presentation, it's also considered on the suboptimal end, because the T allele, the presence of it, is what is in fact suboptimal. For ACE, the A is optimal and the G is suboptimal. And then for PCSK9, if you have the GG, that's common. If you have, I believe it's a T, then that would be what gives you the additional cardioprotective benefit. PCSK9 is kind of like 1P21 in that there is no suboptimal allele there. It's like a normal one, or there's one that's additional and protective in the body. So that's how those ones work.
Love it. All right, Jennifer has a question. What about people in the middle with these genes, so not at either extreme? So what Jennifer is getting at here is when you see your gene presentation, you're going to see two letters. They represent two alleles. And sometimes you'll see, like, for example, an AA, sometimes you'll see a GG, and then sometimes you'll see something we'll call heterozygous, meaning one of each, an A and a G. And she's asking, really, where does that land? Unfortunately, so many delightful things in science, there's no clear answer ever. It depends on the specific gene, which is always why you have to look it up in the report. Usually with a heterozygous, it is going to fall somewhere in the middle. Meaning, so for example, with CYP1A2, you would expect you have a slow presentation, you have a fast presentation, right? So AA is that, oh Lord, I'm going to mix myself up. AA is fast, correct? No, CC is fast, right, Justin? Hold on.
Yeah, CC.
Thank you. CC is fast. AA is on the slower side. You would expect that AC would be somewhere in the middle. It's never a true middle. Our AC is actually going to lean a little bit more towards the fast side. So are you going to be as fast as that CC? No, but you're pretty close to it. There's other genes, though, where, for example, it may lean the other way. So it's something that you kind of have to look at. It's a gene by gene thing. Usually somewhere leaning towards one side or the other. Very rarely will it be a true middle split. Yeah. All right. Do you want to grab our next one, Justin?
Yeah. So Karma has a question. It's similar to one of the questions from before, actually, about just having the high total cholesterol. Excuse me. The HDL is quite high, and other readings as well. And the calcium score is actually low. But her doctors don't know what to do about it. You know, it's an anomaly. So she's wondering, how does this naturally high cholesterol show up in the DNA? And I would offer a similar answer to before, right? As far as like epigenetics, clinical correlation, all of those things are going to matter here. Basically, there are certain things, right? Like if you have the PCSK9 in combination with an ApoE3/4, and maybe you don't have the greatest nitric oxide, so it doesn't dilate the blood vessels properly. So blood pressure, right? All of these things together, that's why it's one big map. To truly answer the question, though, I would need an actual session with you to do all of the clinical correlation, lifestyle history, etc. But there are likely contributors within your genes, and it could be in the detox, the methylation, the vitamin D, antioxidation, glutathionization. Everything we talk about, right, matters for inflammation, detox. The things that equal high cholesterol is not just a one and done vacuum thing, right? So there's probably contributors there, but we would have to dive through the DNA 360 real good to get to the bottom of that.
Love it. All right, our last question is coming in from Bernadette. And they've given us some detail, but the question essentially boils down to their cardiologist wants them on a statin in response to higher lipids. And they're saying they're concerned about that because statins have been shown in some people to have, taking too much cholesterol, zapping muscles, kind of, there's a larger side effect profile, both the obvious, which is, when it comes to muscle pain, and less obvious, which can be some impacts to the brain and to cognition. So I'm going to offer two answers to you, Bernadette. First and foremost, I think as a patient, it's always your right to go seeking a second opinion. And I think that can be really important because not every doctor is going to have the same view. Some doctors are going to say, oh, I have different thresholds. You have to be asking the question, tell me why your threshold's different. That becomes really important, right? But I think seeking a second opinion can be really important, especially when you're not comfortable with what the doctor is telling you. So I'd say absolutely go look for a second opinion. Be careful not to shop for an opinion, though. I've seen some people who are like, I've seen 10 doctors and they've all told me the exact same thing, and I need you to tell me the opposite. So if you've seen 10 doctors and you've gotten the exact same opinion, you might want to retire that search. The other thing I would say is, if let's pretend at the end of the day you see 10 doctors and they all say you should be on statin, there are different blood panels that you can be taking that can track some of the more um, insidious or less obvious side effects of a statin, in particular, some of the brain impact. So I would say, let's pretend a doctor, 10 different doctors say absolutely you have to be doing statins. I would talk to them and say, okay, I'm concerned about the side effect profile. Can we start running blood work to see if this is something that is causing issues in my body? I believe it's something called the Boston Heart Panel that tends to have all the markers that we want to be looking at for statins. So I'd really encourage, again, if 10 doctors say you should be doing it, you probably should be doing that extra blood work, that extra diligence, so that you can be tracking some of the potential side effects. Remember that not all of these side effects show up. There's an incredible impact of genes in this. I'd encourage you to look into something called our PGX panel, which stands for pharmacogenomics, that looks at the genes that you have, how are they going to interact with the medications that are being suggested? It really helps tailor personalized medication based on genes. This is a step beyond the DNA 360, so I'll have Vanny put a link to that test. But the test, it's very similar to what you did for the DNA 360. It's a happy little cheek swab, and we're asking the question of, it's a whole different set of genes, but based on your genes, do you respond better or worse to certain medications? And so that can be a really big guiding support for your doctor, especially should the answer come back to yes, statins. Okay. All right. I think that is that.
I think so.
Yeah.
Whew,
Yeah, we did it, sir.
nailed
That's
it right on
great.
time.
Yeah. Yeah, this felt great, audience. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for your excitement. Um, we were adding a lot to our panel in the coming year. And so we're really, really excited to be having more sessions like this where we're able to talk about greater nuance within your genes. And Justin, I'm excited to be doing that with you. I really value the well-rounded approach and that you connect a lot of dots for us. So thank you, sir.
Absolutely. And thank you. I'm a health coach, right? So it's like that zoomed out view that a health coach would take. Like, what does this really mean? And how are we really going to deal with this, like, feet on the ground kind of thing? I think that's where I
Yeah.
specialize. And to have you here to make sure that my science is correct is also fantastic. So thank you. And thanks everybody for showing up. Science it's always burgeoning. It's a thing that we're growing. And I'm so excited to have you all along the journey. So thanks for showing up. And you're the reason why we do all